Surely you have more interesting questions than those that pertain to my sex life.
Yes, of course, I only...
If you don't mind, I would prefer to keep this discussion on relevant issues, Miss Campion. And frankly, I don't see how my ex-husband's or the exhilarating 1950s has much of anything to do with my book.
Yes, ma'am, as you wish.
Thank you.
So, back to your book, then.
Tea.
No, thank you. In your upcoming book, you make a controversial hypothesis about children's literature.
I'm not sure it's so much as controversial as neglected. Originally, there was no distinct branch of fiction intended specifically for children. That is, until the introduction of the Victorian notions of the purity and sanctity of childhood demanded that fiction for children be made, well, pure.
Sanctified.
And sanctimonious. It is difficult to read Kingsley's The Water Babies without cringing.
I don't think I'm familiar with that book.
Quelle surprise.
What precisely was it about the Victorians that created fiction for children?
It wasn't necessarily the Victorians that created fiction for children. In fact, the concept of childhood is a relatively recent development. For hundreds of years, children were considered small adults. Children were dressed in miniature versions of adult clothing. If you look at lithographs and artistic representations of humans preceding the Victorian period, children were drawn like very small people, without any consideration given to their proportions.
Yes, but what about fairy tales like Cinderella or Rapunzel? Those are kind of children's fiction, and surely they existed before the Victorian era.
Perhaps you should review your notes from my lectures. You are correct in identifying those folk tales as preceding the Victorian era. Let us consider the Brothers Grimm and their quote-unquote fairy tales, which you cite. The original account that the Grimm brothers wrote was entitled Kinder- und Hausmärchen, or Children's and Household Tales. These were intended to be scholarly publications documenting German folkloric history. However, when it was discovered that these folk tales were being read in the nursery, they were quickly bowdlerized to make more appropriate for children. Perhaps let us look to Perrault, another pre-Victorian fairy tale anthologist. The original account in La Belle au Bois Dormant, or Sleeping Beauty in the Woods, is an extremely twisted and dark folk tale. The original coda in Perrault's version involves the prince's ogre stepmother and her attempts to frame Beauty for cannibalizing her own children. Variant versions of the same tale, which precede Perrault, describe Beauty, who has fallen comatose due to an allergic reaction to a flat splinter, being raped in her sleep by her prince. Now tell me, Miss Campion, how much of that survived in the Disney film?
Well, those are all very good points. You seem to have such a cynical perspective on children's fiction. Why study it if it enrages you so?
Because, dear girl, these stories are the ones that shape our belief systems that we adopt as adults. These fairy tales, which the academic community is all too willing to discount as mere child's play, are perhaps the most important and influential genres of literature which shape our formative years. Girls learn to wait for princes and not to fight for themselves because war is a messy business, to quote our beloved C.S. Lewis. We wouldn't want to get our petticoats dirty.
Well, as you mentioned Lewis, I do remember getting very upset when I was reading those Narnia books. The passage that I read earlier from your book, that's my favorite part of your book. It's just, I remember that sequence so vividly in the last battle where this train crashed and everyone's killed except Susan, of course.
Monty,
No, thank you. But you know, that always made me angry.
what did, dear?
Susan. Everyone else gets to go off to paradise, but Susan's no longer a friend of Narnia because she likes to wear lipstick and nylons. I even talked to my English teacher about the problem of Susan when I was 12.
And what, pray tell, did your teacher say?
She said that although Susan had refused paradise then, that she still had time to repent.
Repent what?
Not believing, I suppose, and the sin of Eve.
I doubt there was much time for nylons and lipstick after a family was killed. Certainly wasn't any for me. A little money, less than one might expect from her parents' estate, to lodge her and feed her, no luxuries.
Yes, but there must have been something else wrong with Susan. Something they just don't tell us, otherwise she wouldn't have been damned like that. Denied the heaven of further up and further in. I mean, everyone she ever cared about had gone on to be rewarded a land of magic and waterfalls and joy, and she was left behind.
I don't know about the girl in the books, but remaining behind would have meant that she was available to identify her siblings' bodies. There were a lot of questions added I was taken to a nearby school. It was the first day of term and they'd taken the bodies there. My older brother looked all right, like he was asleep, with that magnificent mane of blonde hair, perfectly cropped. The other two were a bit messier.
So what are you talking about?
I suppose Susan would have seen their bodies and thought, we're on holiday now. The perfect school holiday. Romping in meadows with talking animals, world without end, she might have done. I remember thinking what a great deal of damage a train can do when it hits another train. To the people who were traveling. I suppose you've never had to identify a body, dear?
No.
That's a blessing. I remember looking at them and thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if it's not him after all? My younger brother was decapitated. A god who would punish me for liking nylons and party invitations by making me walk through that school dining room with the flies to identify Ed. Well, he's enjoying himself a bit too much, isn't he? Like a cat, getting the last ounce of enjoyment out of a mouse. Or a gram of enjoyment, I suppose it must be these days.
Damn, my tape ran out. Professor, would you mind repeating that for us?
Get out.
Professor Hastings, I'm sorry.
Get out. Get out of my house.
Miss Hastings, please, I didn't
Don't
mean
you
to-
dare call me that! Get out, Greta! Get out! Get out of my house! Get out! Get out of my house! Get out! William, what are you? Peter? Peter, is that you? Oh, Peter! I knew you would come back! Oh, darling Ed, Edwin! Lucy, Luz, where have you all been? Who are you? I don't recognize you. You seem very familiar but distant. What is your name, young miss? Tell me your name. Please, I must know your name. Tell me your name!
It is summer, and the grass is a vivid shade of green. I'm standing in the battlefield, holding my sister's hand. We watch as the lion and the witch come down the hill together. I look up into the golden lion's burning amber eyes and whisper to my sister, "He's not a tame lion, is he?" The witch turns and looks at us all and says to the lion coldly, "I agree to the terms of our agreement. You shall have the girls. Myself, I shall keep the boys." I suddenly realize what must have happened, and I run. I run as fast as I can, over the dead bodies and through the flies. I trip on the centaur. His cold, dead eyes accuse me. His blood stains my hands and my skirt. The lion is on me in a second. He eats all of me in one giant shuddering crunch, and all that's left of me is my head and one of my hands. I wish he hadn't mauled me, then I would not have had to watch. Dead eyelids cannot be closed, and so I stare at the twisted things my brothers have become. The lion eats my little sister more slowly. It seems with more relish and pleasure. She had always been his favorite. The witch removes her white robe, revealing a body no less white, with high, small breasts and nipples so dark they're almost black. She lies back onto the grass and spreads her legs. The grass beneath her is rimmed with frost. "Now," the witch says. The lion licks her white cleft with its pink tongue until she can have no more of it. She pulls its huge mouth to hers, wraps her icy legs into his golden fur. Being dead, my eyes and the head on the grass cannot look away. It's nothing.